It wasn't the win that rocked Cleveland to its core. It was everything that followed in its shadow. One moment, the Browns had just squeezed out a narrow victory. The next, their head coach was standing before the cameras, delivering a line no NFL coach is ever supposed to utter. Not after a win. Not in a press conference filled with flashing lights and rolling cameras. Not without a carefully crafted strategy behind it. Kevin Stefanski, usually calm, controlled, and methodical, cracked. And in a single sentence, he threw the Browns' entire quarterback situation into chaos. Ownership was furious. The locker room split. The media exploded. And the league hasn't stopped buzzing since. What drove Stefanski to that breaking point? Why choose that moment, when everything on paper still looked fine, to unleash a truth that set Cleveland ablaze? And most importantly, what does it mean for the Browns moving forward? Because this wasn't just a throwaway comment. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. This was raw honesty, career-level honesty, the kind that burns bridges and scars reputations. And behind the curtain, players were already whispering. Front office executives froze in disbelief. Ownership? They went nuclear. To understand how it all unraveled, we have to rewind the story. Because this isn't just about a press conference. It's about a war inside the franchise, and it's spilled out live on national television. What was supposed to be a routine post-game presser turned into a historic turning point. Typically, these things are bland. Coaches step up, rattle off a few cliches, say something safe about team effort, and exit the stage without leaving a head. Kevin Stefanski stood frozen at the microphone, his eyes heavy, his voice drained, his posture screaming defeat. And then, he dropped it. Looking back, starting Dillon was a mistake. 6 words, and the room went dead silent. Reporters blinked in shock. Media assistants backstage exchanged panicked looks. Ownership, watching from afar, felt their vision collapse in real time. Because NFL head coaches simply do not say that. Not during a win. Not with cameras capturing every syllable. And certainly not when the quarterback you just buried with your words is still suiting up in your locker room. The internet ignited. Timelines on X, formerly Twitter, overflowed instantly. ESPN anchors cut into programming. Debate shows scrambled to react. It wasn't just a confession. It was a bombshell. The kind of statement that blows apart every attempt to keep its cracks hidden from the world. And for the fans, this was vindication. For weeks, they had been screaming online, arguing in bars, and booing in stadiums, saying exactly what Stefanski had just admitted. The difference? He said it on the biggest stage possible. And this was only the start of the storm. To understand why Cleveland erupted, you have to go back a few weeks. The Browns weren't fighting over quarterbacks then. They were celebrating one. Shedeur Sanders had just lit up the preseason against Carolina. Poise, precision, mobility. Everything about him screamed franchise quarterback. The stats backed it up. The crowd roared like it hadn't in years. Even TV ratings spiked nearly 50% beyond projections. It felt obvious. Out of nowhere, reports surfaced that Sanders was injured. No specifics, no timetable, just gone. And almost immediately after, Dillon Gabriel was named the starter. Despite his mediocre camp, despite his forgettable preseason reps, despite everything pointing in the opposite direction, fans were baffled. The media started digging. Was Sanders truly hurt, or was something else going on? Because the timing was bizarre. The decision felt forced. And when Gabriel actually stepped onto the field, he looked exactly like what fans feared. Robotic, flat, uninspiring. The whispers only grew louder. But the Browns stonewalled. They doubled down on the official story. And even players in the locker room weren't fully buying it. It was a lie. And it was only a matter of time before it collapsed. Cleveland's win over the Eagles? But if you actually watch the game, You saw what everyone else did, an offense that looked lifeless, a rhythm that was completely disconnected, and a quarterback who played like he was terrified to lose instead of hungry to win. Gabriel's final numbers: 18 completions, 29 attempts, 173 yards, 1 interception, 0 touchdowns. On paper, not a disaster. But in reality, it was everything the numbers don't show. He missed wide-open throws downfield. He overthrew potential touchdowns. And when the game begged for a spark, he checked it down again and again. The crowd groaned. The broadcasters sighed. Even network executives watching ratings dip knew the product was failing live. By the fourth quarter, it wasn't Gabriel carrying Cleveland. And Stefanski? He looked like a man living with regret. On the sideline, his face told the story. Arms folded, eyes vacant. He wasn't watching a football game. He was watching the consequences of his decision play out in real time. That night didn't just expose Gabriel. It exposed the cover-up. It proved the Browns had bet on the wrong guy, and the entire stadium knew it. No one in the press room expected honesty. Reporters walked in prepared for the same tired cliches. We're still evaluating. Dillon managed the game. It was a team effort. That's what coaches say. That's what fans expect. That's the script. But Kevin Stefanski didn't follow the script. He stepped up to the podium, looked like he hadn't slept in days, jaw clenched tight, shoulders drooping under invisible weight. And in looking back, starting Dillon was a mistake. We need to evaluate everything moving forward. The room froze. You could hear the clicks of record buttons. PR staffers stood paralyzed. Assistant coaches backstage whispered, horrified. Because Stefanski hadn't just broken protocol, he had broken trust. NFL coaches don't bury their quarterbacks after wins. They don't openly admit to mishandling roster decisions. And they never, ever blindside their front office live on television. But that's exactly what Stefanski had just done. And in that moment, the story shifted from QB controversy to franchise civil war. Behind his words, ownership pressure, locker room unrest, weeks of frustration bottled up, and all of it burst in one unfiltered sentence. The fallout was, and insiders confirmed it. There was no real injury. It had been a cover. Ownership wanted Dillon Gabriel. That was the bottom line. Sanders may have been the better player, but Gabriel was the safe choice. He fit the system. He didn't question authority. He kept his head down and followed orders. Sanders? He was loud, confident, sometimes defiant. He carried the energy of a superstar, the kind that excites fans but makes executives uneasy. And Stefanski, he was trapped in the middle. According to sources, he was pressured into starting Gabriel. The call came from the top, and to keep the peace, he complied. But each week, the truth grew harder to hide. Gabriel's mistakes stacked up. Sanders' brilliance in practice shined brighter. The lie became heavier and heavier. And when Stefanski reached that podium, he had a choice: stick to the script or tell the truth and deal with the fallout. He chose honesty, and in doing so, he may have detonated his own career. Inside the locker room, the reaction was instant. Phones buzzed with push notifications. Clips of Stefanski's press conference were spreading faster than wildfire. And for the first time all season, players stopped whispering. They spoke openly. Offensive linemen smirked. Why? Because with Sanders at the QB, they looked like world beaters. He moved. He escaped pressure. He made them shine. With Gabriel, they were exposed. 2 seconds in the pocket, and he was swallowed. Receivers felt relief. No more wasted routes. Sanders actually threw them the ball. He bought them time. He gave them chances to create. With Gabriel, it was checkdowns and missed windows. Even defenders admitted it quietly. They hated practicing against Sanders because he was unpredictable, electric, dangerous. Sanders was chaos, and chaos wins games. And then there was Sanders himself. As Cleveland burned online, he said nothing. No tweets, no Instagram stories, no cryptic posts, just silence. Sources say he stayed home with his tight inner circle, watching everything unfold, not with glee, but with patience. Not celebrating, not complaining, just waiting. And that silence, it spoke louder than words. Because while Gabriel's camp scrambled to explain, Sanders sat still, like a man who knew the storm was his to ride. By the time most fans had finished replaying Stefanski's stunning quote, the Browns' front office was already in emergency mode. Inside the owner suite, chaos erupted. Jimmy Haslam, caught off guard, it was an eruption. One source described it as a nuclear meltdown. Furniture shifted, phones slammed, panic rippled through the organization. PR and legal teams were called in before Stefanski even left the stadium tunnel. Because here's the real issue. This wasn't just about football anymore. This was about perception, narrative, control. And Stefanski had just ripped that control out of ownership's hands. Dillon Gabriel wasn't just another quarterback. He wasn't just a draft pick. He was Haslam's guy. Handpicked, endorsed, protected. Even when the numbers didn't justify it, Gabriel was elevated because ownership said so. And now, with one sentence, Stefanski torched that story live on national TV. Behind closed doors, lawyers pored over Stefanski's contract. Was this breach of loyalty? Meanwhile, the PR team scrambled to craft a clarification, a watered-down explanation that could smooth things over. But every second they delayed, clips of Stefanski's raw honesty spread further online. Executives frantically dialed contacts, working the phones to contain the fire. But some insiders whispered another truth. A few higher-ups had already started polishing resumes because they knew what everyone else did. Once Stefanski went off script, he didn't just challenge the system, he exposed it. And for $1 billion NFL franchise, balancing ego, media rights, and playoff hopes, this was the kind of scandal you don't spin away. You just try to survive it. Stacking the two quarterbacks side by side only widened the wound. Dillon Gabriel, disciplined, textbook, structured, but robotic, predictable, too safe. His preseason performance wasn't catastrophic, but short passes, safe reads, little risk. The moment the game demanded creativity or leadership, he vanished. One overthrow that killed a sure touchdown, one interception forced across the middle, multiple missed deep shots. Every mistake chipped away at his credibility. And just like that, a game that could have lit up the stadium became forgettable. Then there was Shedeur Sanders. In limited preseason snaps, he looked like a different breed altogether. Completion rate north of 70%. Yards per attempt close to 9. Quarterback rating above 110. But it wasn't just the stats. It was the eye test. He threw with anticipation. He moved like pressure didn't exist. He made the entire offense feel alive. That's the difference. Gabriel plays to not lose. Sanders plays to take over. He has swagger. He commands the huddle. With Gabriel, the team functioned. With Sanders, the team thrived. One quarterback manages the game, the other changes the game. And for a Browns franchise desperate for identity, for excitement, for relevance, every head coach, every general manager, every NFL owner tuned in that night. And whether they admit it or not, they asked themselves, could this happen to us? Because the NFL isn't just about talent, it's about optics. It's about who excites the fans, who sells the jerseys, who drives ratings. Gabriel may have been the safe option, but Sanders, he was the entertainment option, the viral quarterback, the prime-time draw, the name that sells highlight reels before they're even edited. He represented the new generation, bold, confident, unapologetically marketable. And by benching him, Cleveland wasn't just shelving a player. They were shelving revenue, shelving culture, shelving momentum. The NFL is not just a league, it's an entertainment empire. And because production matters, But personality, presence, and popularity, they might matter just as much. Now the league was watching, quietly debating one question: follow Cleveland's path of protecting the system, or embrace the chaos and let the best player play, no matter the politics? When Stefanski stood at that podium, it wasn't simply a coach lamenting a poor decision. It was a man cracking under weeks of pressure. It was a franchise tearing at the seams in front of millions of viewers. It was truth breaking through scripted lies. He admitted what the fans had shouted all along, that Dillon Gabriel wasn't the answer, that Shedeur Sanders should have been the guy, and that the Browns' carefully constructed illusion was finally. And at the heart of it all, two quarterbacks now stood at opposite crossroads. Gabriel, once the hand-picked favorite of ownership, was suddenly fighting for relevance. Sanders, silent, composed, unbothered, watched his stock skyrocket without saying a word. Because this wasn't just about football. It was about ego versus evidence, control versus chaos, system versus spark. And Stefanski, whether intentionally or not, handed the world the truth Cleveland didn't want exposed. But if you thought the press conference was the climax, you were wrong. That was only the ignition point. The real explosion came in the days that followed. Players talking openly, executives fighting behind closed doors, ownership grasping for control, and in the middle of it all, the fans. Cleveland's most loyal, most tortured fan base suddenly felt more empowered than ever. Because now, their voices, they were vindicated by their head coach. The stadium chants, the Twitter rants, the constant calls for Sanders. All of it now carried weight, and ownership couldn't silence them anymore. What came next turned a football controversy into a cultural earthquake. The years following his championship reign were some of the most testing in Luke Rockhold's professional and personal life. Having climbed the mountaintop, he now had to face the daunting reality of staying there or dealing with the brutal consequences of not being able to. Every fighter dreams of becoming a champion, but very few truly understand the toll it takes on both body and mind. For Luke, this period became a test not only of his physical durability, but of his emotional resilience. After a shocking defeat and the loss of his title, many fans and analysts wrote him off. The MMA world, unforgiving as always, has a short memory. One night, you're celebrated as the best in the world, and the next, you're dismissed as yesterday's news. Luke could feel that shift in energy around him. The aura of invincibility that once surrounded him was replaced by whispers of vulnerability. But Rockhold wasn't ready to give up. His mindset, forged through years of struggle, refused to let one or even multiple losses define his career. However, reality is rarely that simple. Injuries began to stack up, training camps became grueling, and the desire to return to form clashed with the harsh limitations of his body. His leg, in particular, gave him endless problems. It wasn't just about fighting opponents inside the cage anymore. It was about fighting his own body's refusal to cooperate. For a professional athlete, this internal war is sometimes. Still, Luke wasn't just a fighter by trade, he was a fighter at heart. Every setback became another lesson, another opportunity to test how far he could push himself. He began to rethink what fighting meant to him. Was it about titles and accolades? Or was it about the pursuit of self-mastery? This introspection didn't weaken him. It gave him new fuel. One of the most misunderstood aspects of Rockhold's journey is how much he had to balance outside the cage. Unlike many fighters who solely focused on combat sports, Luke's life stretched into modeling, brand endorsements, and media appearances. While these ventures opened doors and gave him financial security, they also pulled him in multiple directions. Critics often use this as ammunition, questioning his dedication to the sport. But those who truly knew him understood that Rockhold had always been more than just a fighter. His interests, ambitions, and skills were multifaceted. As his career entered its later phases, Luke began to approach fighting differently. Instead of chasing validation, he focused on embracing the process. This wasn't about proving others wrong. It was about proving something to himself. Even when the odds were stacked against him, he entered the cage with the same fire, the same determination, the same refusal to quit that defined his early years in the sport. In interviews, he became more reflective. Gone was the brash confidence that often rubbed opponents and fans the wrong way. In its place was a wiser, calmer man who had lived through both triumph and disaster. He began to speak openly about mental health, about the pressures of being in the spotlight, and about the loneliness that comes when the cheers fade away. These candid admissions made him more relatable, especially to younger fighters who looked up. One of Luke's defining qualities is that he never sugarcoated reality. He admitted when he wasn't at his best. He acknowledged the pain, the self-doubt, and the fear. But he always paired those admissions with a relentless commitment to push forward. That balance of honesty and perseverance made his story resonate with fans, who knew that life itself can often feel like an endless fight. Even when his record took hits, Rockhold's legacy remained intact because his career wasn't built solely on numbers. It was built on moments. The emphatic finishes, the highlight reel kicks, the nights when he made the impossible look effortless. But Luke Rockhold's journey extends beyond fighting. He became a mentor figure to younger athletes, sharing his knowledge, his struggles, and his hard-earned wisdom. His willingness to be vulnerable, to admit failures as much as successes, gave his words weight. Many fighters, especially those early in their careers, found inspiration in his story. The arc of his career embodies the phrase, conceive, believe, achieve. He conceived of a dream bigger than himself, to become a champ by circumstances outside of their control. What defines a person isn't whether they fall, but whether they rise again. Luke's story is living proof of that principle. In recent years, as he stepped back from fighting and explored new opportunities, Rockhold has embraced the next chapter of his life with the same intensity he brought to the octagon. From business ventures to lifestyle projects, he continues to evolve. But no matter what he does, he carries with him the identity of a fighter, not just in the physical sense, but in the spiritual one. He once said that fighting is the purest form of truth. There's no hiding in a cage, no excuses, no shortcuts. Either you're prepared or you're not. Either you rise to the occasion or you don't. That lesson, though born from combat sports, applies universally. Life, like fighting, is about preparation, execution, and resilience. As fans look back on Luke Rockhold's career, they may debate his ranking among the greats, but there's no debating his impact. He inspired countless fighters with his style, his confidence, and his story. He gave fans unforgettable memories. And he left behind a legacy that proves greatness isn't defined by perfection. It's defined by perseverance. In the end, Rockhold's career is not a tale of unbroken dominance. It's a tale of rising, falling, and rising again. It's about the courage to dream big, the grit to chase those dreams, and the humility to keep moving forward, even when reality doesn't go your way. So when we think about Luke Rockhold, we shouldn't just think about the championship belt he once wore. We should think about the man who embodied the spirit of conceive, believe, achieve. A man who faced the highest highs and the lowest lows, and never stopped fighting, no matter what. And that's a lesson far more powerful than any single victory. It's a legacy that will inspire not just fighters, but anyone striving to overcome obstacles in their own life. Because at the end of the day, Luke Rockhold showed us that champions aren't only made in the cage, they're made in the way they live their lives.